The crystal chandeliers above the grand ballroom burned like frozen stars, scattering light across silk gowns, jeweled crowns, and polished marble floors. Music drifted through the air, slow and elegant, carried by violins that seemed to breathe with the room itself. Nobles laughed softly, hiding secrets behind porcelain smiles, while servants moved like shadows, careful not to exist more than necessary. Tonight was meant to be a celebration of unity, power, and loyalty to the crown. But beneath the gold and velvet, something darker waited, patient and precise. She stood near the edge of the hall, fingers curled tightly around a delicate fan, her posture flawless, her face calm. No one watching her would guess that her heart was racing. Every instinct in her body screamed that something was wrong. She had felt at the moment she entered the palace, a subtle shift in the air, a tension that clung to her skin like a warning. Years of surviving court politics had taught her one thing. Danger rarely announced itself loudly. It whispered. Across the room, the Duke raised his goblet as courtiers gathered around him. He was everything the kingdom admired. Young, powerful, impossibly composed. His dark coat was tailored to perfection, and the silver crest of his house glinted proudly against his chest. To them, he was untouchable. To her, he was standing far too close to death. Her gaze locked onto the goblet in his hand. It was the wine. She had seen it poured only moments earlier, watched as a servant she did not recognize leaned just a second too long over the glass. At first, she had dismissed the unease as paranoia. Court-bred suspicion the way swamps bred insects. But then she noticed the servant's hands. They were trembling, and then gone, disappeared into the crowd as if swallowed whole. The Duke laughed at something a lord beside him said, lifting the goblet toward his lips. Time slowed, stretching painfully thin. She did not think. She moved. Crossing the ballroom felt like running through water. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. If she made a scene, she would draw attention. Attention was deadly. As she reached him, she stumbled just enough. Her fan slipped from her fingers, clattering against his arm. The wine spilled. Red liquid splashed across his glove and the marble floor below. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, her voice soft but steady as she reached for his sleeve, pretending embarrassment. Her lips came close to his ear, hidden by the curtain of her hair. "Don't drink that." The Duke froze. For a fraction of a second, nothing existed but the two of them. His sharp eyes flicked to her face, searching, calculating. He did not ask why. He did not pull away. Instead, he slowly lowered the goblet, his expression unreadable. The murmurs around them grew louder. Someone laughed nervously. Another courtier waved it off as clumsiness. The Duke smiled, smooth and controlled, lifting his unsoiled hand. "An accident," he said calmly. "No harm done." Servants rushed forward to clean the floor. A new goblet was offered, but he waved it away. The moment passed, or at least that was what the room believed. She stepped back, heart pounding so loudly she was certain others could hear it. She had done what she came to do, or so she thought. Later that night, as the palace emptied and the last echoes of music faded into silence, she was summoned. The Duke's private study was a world apart from the ballroom. Dark would line the walls, shelves heavy with books and secrets. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. He stood near the window, his back to her, as she entered. "You were very bold tonight," he said without turning. She closed the door carefully behind her. "It was not my intention to offend you." "Offend?" He turned now, eyes sharp, voice calm. "You may have saved my life." Silence stretched between them. Finally, he spoke again. "You warned me without proof. You risked humiliation. Worse." "What?" She hesitated. "The truth was dangerous, but lies were more so. Because I recognized the servant who poured the wine." His expression darkened. "From where?" "From my past," she replied. "From places the court prefers to pretend do not exist." He studied her closely, as if seeing her for the first time. "Then you know this was not coincidence." "No," she said. "It was a message." The Duke walked to his desk, resting his hands on its edge. My enemies grow impatient. They're not just your enemies, she said quietly. If they succeed, the kingdom will bleed. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Resolve, perhaps, or regret. Then you are more involved than you should be. I already am, she answered. The moment I stopped you from drinking that wine, my fate changed. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, the first warning of an approaching storm. Neither of them spoke of trust. In the palace, trust was a currency more valuable than gold and twice as lethal. Yet in that quiet room, an unspoken alliance formed, fragile, dangerous, and necessary. The Duke poured 2 fresh glasses of wine from a sealed bottle, placing one before her. He did not drink. To enemies unseen, he said. She met his gaze, and truths yet revealed. As she lifted the glass, she knew this was only the beginning. The poison had missed its mark tonight, but the hand that poured it was still out there, watching, waiting, and next time it would not be so careless. The night deepened, wrapping the palace in silence broken only by the distant crack of thunder and the soft hiss of rain against tall windows. She left the Duke's study with measured steps, her expression composed, but inside her thoughts raced. The corridors felt longer now, every shadow sharper, every sound heavier. She was no longer just a guest at court. She was a variable, and variables were eliminated. As she reached her chambers, she sensed it again, that tightening in her chest, the instinct that had saved her more times than she could count. She did not open the door immediately. Instead, she listened. Nothing. Slowly, she turned the handle. The room was dark, but not untouched. Her candle had been moved, just slightly, enough for her to notice. She closed the door behind her without a sound and stepped farther inside, allowing her eyes to adjust. The window curtains stirred, though the glass was shut. Someone had been here. Recently. Her fingers brushed the small blade hidden beneath her sleeve, the metal familiar and comforting. Come out, she said quietly. If you meant to kill me, you would have already tried. A pause. Then a shape detached itself from the shadows near the fireplace. You are calmer than rumors suggest, a man's voice said. He stepped into the dim light, dressed in dark servant's clothes, though his posture betrayed him. Too straight, too controlled. His face was plain, forgettable, the kind designed to vanish in crowds. You spilled the wine, he continued. That was not part of the plan. She studied him carefully. Not your plan. A thin smile curved his lips. You assumed too much. You were at the banquet, she said. Watching the Duke. Watching me. His eyes narrowed. Then you noticed more than you should. Then you made a mistake coming here, she replied. He chuckled softly. On the contrary, I came to warn you. About what? She asked. About choosing sides. The blade in her sleeve pressed lightly against her wrist. I did not choose a side. I prevented murder. In this palace, he said, those are often the same thing. She held his gaze. Who sent you? No one you could name, he answered. But I can tell you this. The poison was only a test. Her breath caught for a fraction of a second. A test for whom? For you, he said simply. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor. The man stepped back, already retreating into shadow. They are watching now, he said. Be careful who you trust. Even the Duke. Then he was gone, slipping through the window with impossible ease. Moments later, a knock came at the door. She hid the blade and opened it to find a palace guard standing rigidly outside. His Grace requests your presence, he said. Again, the Duke did not waste time on pleasantries when she returned to his study. He stood near the fire, jaw tense, eyes sharp. You were visited, he said. She stiffened. You have spies in my chambers now. I have enemies everywhere, he replied. And so do you. She hesitated only a moment before speaking. A man came. He claimed the poisoning was a test. The Duke's expression darkened. Then my suspicions were correct. You suspected this would happen? I suspected something worse, he said. If they wish me dead, I would already be buried. She frowned. Then why attempt it at all? To see who would intervene, he said quietly. To expose loyalty or weakness. Silence fell between them. You are surrounded by people who would watch you die, she said. So are you, he answered. Now, He walked to his desk and opened a drawer, removing a sealed document. This is why they want me gone. She did not move closer. What is it? A treaty, he said. One that would strip several powerful families of influence, including those skilled in quieter methods. Assassins, she said. Among other things, he replied. If this treaty is signed, their power ends. And if you die, she said slowly, the treaty dies with you. Yes. She exhaled sharply. Then the poison was never meant to succeed. No, he said. It was meant to begin a war in the dark. Thunder crashed outside, rattling the windows. You need protection, she said. He gave a humorless smile. I have an army. You have soldiers, she corrected. Not shadows. His gaze sharpened. You speak as if you know these shadows well. I survived them, she said. Barely. For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed his face. What are you suggesting? That I help you, she said. Properly. And in return, he asked. In return, she said, I stay alive. He considered her words carefully. You understand what this means? Yes, she said. I'll become a target. You already are. Outside the palace walls, the storm broke fully, rain pounding stone like a drumbeat of war. Very well, the Duke said at last. But understand this. If you betray me, I will not hesitate. She met his gaze steadily. If I betray you, I will already be dead. From that night on, the palace changed. Doors closed more quietly. Conversations ended abruptly when she entered a room. Servants avoided her eyes. Whispers followed her through halls once filled with laughter. She noticed new faces among the staff, unfamiliar guards on familiar routes. And always, somewhere just out of sight, she felt the weight of unseen eyes. Days passed, then weeks. The Duke moved forward with the treaty despite warnings. Every signature brought him closer to victory and closer to death. She intercepted messages, uncovered bribes, identified servants who did not belong. Each discovery tightened the noose around those who hunted them. But enemies grew desperate. One evening, as the Duke prepared to address the council, she found a note slipped beneath her door. 3 words, written in careful ink. You chose wrong. She crushed the paper in her hand, because she knew what came next would not be subtle. It would not be quiet. And this time, the poison would not be in the wine. The council chamber was already filling when she arrived, the low murmur of voices echoing beneath the vaulted ceiling. Tall windows let in a pale gray light, the storm clouds outside refusing to fully disperse, as if the sky itself was undecided. Long tables formed a half circle around the Duke's seat, each carved with the insignia of families that had ruled for generations. Power sat here in silk and steel, smiling politely while sharpening knives behind their backs. She took her place near the wall, where she could see everything without being seen too clearly. That was where she was most effective. Her eyes moved constantly, cataloging details. The way one lord avoided meeting the Duke's gaze, the way another's fingers drummed too quickly on the table, the way a servant lingered near the back door far longer than necessary. The Duke entered last. The room stood as one, bows and murmured greetings following him like a practiced performance. He acknowledged them with a nod, his expression composed, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders. He knew this meeting was dangerous. They both did. The session began with formalities, but beneath the polite words, hostility simmered. Objections were raised, concerns voiced, alliances tested aloud. Each delay was deliberate, each argument carefully crafted to slow progress. Then it happened. A sharp crack split the air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then glass exploded inward from one of the high windows, shards raining across the chamber. Chaos followed instantly. Lords shouted. Chairs scraped. Guards surged forward. Down, someone yelled. She was already moving. Her hand caught the Duke's arm, pulling him from his seat as another crack echoed, this one closer. Stone chipped near where his head had been moments earlier. An arrow, or a bolt. She didn't stop to confirm. She shoved him toward the heavy table, using it as cover as guards formed a shield around them. More shouts. A third impact struck wood, embedding deep. Archers, she said under her breath. Outside. The Duke's jaw clenched. So they've abandoned subtlety. Not entirely, she replied. This is distraction. As if on cue, the back doors burst open. Men poured in wearing guard uniforms, blades already drawn. The real guards reacted instantly, steel ringing as chaos erupted in the chamber. Nobles screamed and scattered, ducking beneath tables or fleeing toward side exits. She pushed the Duke behind her, drawing the short blade from her sleeve. The first attacker reached them in seconds. She stepped forward, deflecting his strike and driving the blade into his side with brutal efficiency. He fell without a sound. Another came immediately after. Then another. Her movements were precise, economical. No wasted energy. She had trained for moments like this long before palace walls surrounded her. Blood slicked the floor beneath her feet, but she did not slip. She did not hesitate. "Move!" she shouted to the Duke between clashes. "Now!" They broke toward a side passage as guards finally gained control of the room. She glanced back once, counting bodies, measuring losses. This was not a message anymore. This was a declaration. The passage led to a narrow corridor known only to a few. She slammed the door behind them, barring it with a heavy beam. The Duke leaned against the wall, breathing hard, his immaculate coat torn and stained. "You were right," he said quietly. "They want spectacle now." "Yes," she replied, wiping her blade clean on a fallen banner. "They want fear." A distant roar rose from outside, the crowd in the courtyard reacting to the chaos within. The palace was no longer secure. Not truly. "You need to leave," she said. His head snapped up. "Leave my own palace?" "Tonight," she said firmly. "They expected resistance, but not survival. That gives us a narrow window." He stared at her, then nodded. "Where?" "Somewhere they cannot reach quickly," she said. "Somewhere forgotten." Minutes later, they were moving through service tunnels beneath the palace, accompanied by only 2 guards she trusted. The tunnels smelled of damp stone and old secrets. Torchlight flickered against walls carved centuries earlier for purposes no one remembered anymore. They emerged into the stables just beyond the outer wall, where fresh horses waited, prepared, not by chance. She mounted quickly, offering no explanation. As they rode into the forest beyond the palace, the Duke glanced back once, the spires of his home barely visible through the trees. "If I die tonight," he said, "history will call me weak." "If you stay," she replied, "history won't call you anything at all." They rode hard until dawn, stopping only when the horses could go no farther. The safe house was an old hunting lodge, abandoned by the crown decades earlier. Moss crept along its stone walls, and vines threatened to reclaim it entirely. Perfect. Inside, the air was cold and stale. She barred the doors and checked the windows, her senses still stretched tight. "They will hunt us," the Duke said. "Yes," she replied, "but they will argue about who gets the honor first." He gave a short laugh. "You speak as if you've seen this before." "I have," she said, "and it always ends the same way. Too many enemies. Too much ambition." Silence settled between them as exhaustion finally began to surface. "Why did you really save me?" he asked suddenly. She paused, then sat across from him. "Because if men like them win, the world becomes smaller. Darker. I've lived in that world. I won't return to it." He studied her in the dim light. "You speak like someone who has already lost everything." Her expression hardened. "No, like someone who learned how not to." Outside, a branch snapped. Her hand went to her blade instantly. She rose silently, signaling him to stay back. Through a crack in the door, she saw movement among the trees. Shadows shifting, watching. "They found us," he whispered. "No," she replied softly. "They followed us." She opened the door and stepped into the clearing, blade gleaming faintly in the early light. "Enough," she called. "Show yourselves." Figures emerged slowly, at least 5 of them, armed and confident. The man from her chamber stepped forward. "You run well," he said, "but not forever." She smiled grimly. "Neither do you." Behind her, the Duke readied himself, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. This was no longer about a treaty. It was about survival, and the war in the shadows had just stepped into the light. The man from her chamber raised a hand, and the others stopped advancing. Morning mist clung to the forest floor, curling around boots and blades alike. Birds had gone silent. The world seemed to be holding its breath. "You should have stayed invisible," he said calmly. "You were good at it." She kept her stance loose, balanced, blade angled downward but ready. Invisibility ends the moment someone poisons a duke. He smiled faintly. "You still think this is about him?" Behind her, the duke shifted, gripping a fallen branch like a crude weapon. She did not look back. Her focus remained forward. "If it's not," she said, "you chose a poor way to prove it." The man sighed, almost regretful. "You interfered with a design older than this kingdom. Power does not move because of treaties. It moves because certain people are removed." "By cowards and shadows?" she asked. "By realists," he corrected. "Kings, dukes, councils, they are masks. We remove masks when they crack." She took a slow step forward. The others tensed. "You tested me," she said. "Now you're here to finish it." "No," he replied. "I'm here to offer you a place." The forest seemed to tilt. Even the duke felt it, the shift in the air. "She doesn't want your place," he said sharply. The man ignored him. His eyes never left hers. "You know how this ends if you refuse." "Yes," she said. "With bodies." "Many bodies," he agreed, "including his." She did not hesitate. She threw the blade. It struck the man's shoulder, not deep enough to kill, but enough to stagger him back. In the same instant, she lunged forward, closing the distance before the others could react. Steel rang as blades met, the quiet clearing erupting into violence. She moved like something unbound, every strike calculated, every step deliberate. One attacker fell with a cry, another with a choking gasp. But there were too many, and they had not come unprepared. A blade sliced her arm, hot pain flaring, but she ignored it, turning the momentum into a counterstrike. Behind her, the Duke fought clumsily but fiercely, desperation lending him strength. He struck one man across the face, sending him crashing into a tree. Another rushed him from the side. "Duck!" she shouted. He did, barely, as she drove her blade into the attacker's back. For a moment, it seemed they might survive. Then a horn sounded in the distance. Low, hollow. Her blood ran cold. The man with the wounded shoulder laughed through clenched teeth. "Too slow," he said. "They heard you." "Who?" the Duke demanded. "Everyone," the man replied. More shapes appeared between the trees. Armed riders, cloaked figures, too many to count. This was no longer a skirmish. It was a sweep. She grabbed the Duke's arm. "Run. Now." "There's nowhere to go," he said. "There is," she replied, already pulling him toward the ravine beyond the lodge. "Trust me." They ran as arrows hissed past them, embedding in tree trunks and dirt. One grazed her side, tearing fabric and skin. Pain flared, but adrenaline drowned it out. The ravine opened suddenly before them, a dark slash in the earth, mist rising from its depths. The Duke stared. "You're insane." "Possibly," she said, and shoved him. They fell. Cold air rushed past them, the ground vanishing, the world spinning. She twisted mid-fall, grabbing a jutting root with one hand, the impact tearing a cry from her throat. Her other hand snatched the Duke's sleeve, stopping his fall inches from oblivion. Above them, shouts echoed, furious and confused. "Climb," she hissed. They hauled themselves onto a narrow ledge hidden by foliage. From above, it looked like empty drop. From below, only shadow. They pressed themselves into the stone as boots thundered overhead. Voices cursed. Orders were shouted. Then slowly, reluctantly, the sounds moved away. Minutes passed. Then more. Finally, she exhaled. The Duke leaned his head back against the rock, chest heaving. "You planned that." "I hoped," she said. Planning implies certainty. They stayed hidden until the sun climbed higher, until the forest noise returned cautiously to life. Only then did they move, following the ravine until it widened and led to an underground stream. By nightfall, they reached a place even maps forgot, a ruined chapel half swallowed by earth. She collapsed against its stone wall, blood finally seeping freely now that the danger had passed. "You're hurt," the Duke said, tearing fabric to bind her arm. "I've been worse," she replied, though her vision swam. He worked silently for a moment, then spoke. They offered you a place. Yes. You refused. Yes. Why? He asked. She met his eyes, tired but unbroken. Because once you join monsters, you stop being able to tell yourself you're not one. He absorbed that quietly. Far above them, the palace still stood, unaware that its fate now rested in a forgotten ruin with two fugitives and no allies. But somewhere in the darkness, the shadows were regrouping, and they would not make the same mistake twice. The chapel did not offer comfort, but it offered concealment, and that was enough. Its roof had collapsed long ago, leaving jagged beams pointing toward the sky like broken fingers. Ivy crawled over the stone walls, and an old altar lay cracked in half, its symbols worn smooth by time and neglect. Night settled slowly, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and distant water. She woke before dawn, pain blooming sharply along her side and arm. For a moment, instinct told her she was back somewhere else, somewhere darker, but then she saw the Duke sitting nearby, awake, his back against a pillar, eyes fixed on the ruined doorway. He had not slept. "You should rest," she said quietly. "So should you," he replied. She pushed herself upright, wincing. Later, he studied her injuries with concern he did not bother to hide. "You're losing blood." "I've stopped the worst of it," she said. "Bleeding looks dramatic. It rarely kills quickly." "That's supposed to reassure me?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's supposed to keep you calm." He almost smiled. They spoke little as the day passed. Silence was safer. She listened constantly for signs of pursuit, ears tuned to sounds most people ignored. The shift of wind through leaves, the echo of hooves too distant to see, the unnatural quiet that often came before violence. But nothing came. Either their enemies believed them dead, or they were being patient. By afternoon, she knew which it was. "They're waiting," she said suddenly. The Duke looked up. "For what?" "For us to move," she replied. Predators prefer exhaustion. As if summoned by her words, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Not armed, not threatening, just standing there, visible by design. A messenger. She rose slowly, blade hidden but ready. "Stay here," she told the Duke. "I won't," he said. She did not argue. Some battles could not be fought alone. The figure raised empty hands as they approached. A young woman this time, dressed plainly, eyes sharp but nervous. She stopped several steps away. "I was told to give you this," she said, extending a sealed parchment. "No," the Duke said immediately. The messenger looked to her instead. "It concerns the capital." Her jaw tightened. She took the parchment, breaking the seal carefully. Her eyes scanned the message once, then again. The Duke saw the change in her face. "What is it?" She folded the parchment. "They've moved." "Where?" "The council," she said. "They've declared you unfit to rule. A temporary region has been named." His breath left him slowly. "Temporary." She met his gaze. "You have been legally erased." The messenger swallowed. "There is more." She nodded for the woman to continue. "The treaty," the messenger said. "It was destroyed." Silence followed. Even a wind seemed to pause. "By whom?" the Duke asked. The messenger hesitated. "By your cousin." Something dark flickered behind his eyes. "Of course." She turned to the messenger. "Why tell us?" "Because," the woman said quietly, "some of us do not want what's coming." She glanced at the Duke. "They're consolidating power. Arrests have begun. Anyone suspected of loyalty to you is being removed." "And the people?" he asked. "They're being told you fled because you were guilty," the messenger replied. "That you planned to sell the kingdom." The lie was effective. She could already see how it would spread, how fear would do the rest. "What do they want from us?" she asked. The messenger took a breath. "Surrender." The Duke laughed softly, bitter. "So they can execute me quietly and call it justice." "Yes," the messenger said. "And they want you as well." She felt the familiar tightening in her chest. "Then why are you here?" "Because," the woman said, voice shaking now, "they gave me a choice. Deliver the message, or disappear." The Duke stepped forward. "Go," he said. "Tell them nothing. Forget us." The messenger looked at him with something like gratitude. Then she turned and vanished back into the forest. They stood there long after she left. I've lost everything, the Duke said finally. She shook her head. No, you've lost comfort. There's a difference. He gave her a tired look. You're remarkably calm for someone being hunted by half the kingdom. I've been hunted by worse, she replied. He studied her carefully. You keep saying that. She sighed. Because it's true. They moved at dusk, avoiding roads, following paths only animals and criminals used. She led without hesitation, every turn deliberate. By the second night, the Duke was limping, exhaustion dragging at him. Stop, she said. They sheltered beneath a rock overhang as rain began to fall again. She checked the bindings on her wounds, then finally allowed herself to sit. Who taught you to survive like this? He asked quietly. She stared out into the darkness. People who are dead. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. He waited, sensing the truth pressed close to the surface. I was taken once, she said at last. As leverage, as currency. I learned quickly that the world doesn't save you. You either learn how to disappear, or you die where everyone can see. He said nothing. They trained me, she continued. Not with kindness, with necessity. I escaped when I was useful enough to be careless. He looked at her with something like horror. And they're the ones hunting us now. Yes. The rain intensified, drumming against stone. You could still leave, he said. Save yourself. She looked at him sharply. And go where? Anywhere, he said. You owe me nothing. She considered him for a long moment. Then she shook her head. That's where you're wrong. Footsteps sounded nearby. They both froze. Torches flared in the distance, too many to hide from now. They found us, he whispered. She rose, pain flaring, resolve hardening. No, she said. They followed the messenger. He stared at her. Then this was a trap. Yes, she said, but not the one they think. She stepped out into the rain, blade catching torchlight. Come, she called softly into the darkness. Let's finish this part. And as the shadows closed in, she knew one truth with absolute clarity. This war would not be won by running. Rain blurred the edges of the world as they emerged from the shadows, torchlight flickering across wet stone and mud. The men moved with confidence born from numbers, spreading out instinctively, cutting off escape routes they believed existed. They did not rush. Hunters who rushed made mistakes. She stood still beneath the overhang, blade low, posture relaxed, as if surrender were a possibility. The Duke remained behind her, half hidden by darkness, his breathing controlled but shallow. A voice called out from the torchline. You're surrounded. She tilted her head slightly. Then you've learned nothing. They advanced anyway. The first man came too close, too eager. She stepped into him, redirecting his weight, using the slick ground against him. He fell hard, skull cracking against stone. She did not watch him die. The second lunged, blade flashing. She caught his wrist, twisted, and drove her elbow into his throat. He dropped, choking, torch rolling away into darkness. Then the rain seemed to explode. Arrows hissed from the treeline, not toward her, but past her. Screams followed instantly. One torch went out, then another. Confusion rippled through the attackers as shadows moved where none should be. The Duke stared. That wasn't you. No, she said calmly. That was insurance. Figures emerged from the rain like ghosts, silent and lethal. They wore no crests, no colors, only dark cloaks soaked through and eyes that reflected nothing. They moved through the enemy line with brutal precision, blades flashing once, twice, then disappearing again. The attackers panicked. Orders were shouted, then cut short. Some tried to run. They didn't make it far. Within minutes, it was over. Bodies lay scattered across the clearing, rain washing blood into the soil. The remaining torches burned unattended, crackling softly as if nothing extraordinary had happened. One of the shadowed figures approached her, lowering his hood. He was older than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply been younger then. You took your time, she said. He gave a thin smile. You taught us patience. The Duke stepped forward, eyes sharp. Who are they? She did not look at him. People who owed me a debt. The man inclined his head slightly toward the Duke. You must be the reason she broke silence. The Duke stiffened. Silence from whom? From the dead, the man replied. She finally turned to face him. I didn't summon you. No, he agreed. You didn't need to. Then why now? She asked. He glanced at the fallen bodies. Because the balance shifted. When shadows grow arrogant, they stop checking the dark. She exhaled slowly. How many? Enough, he said. For now. The Duke absorbed this, eyes moving between them. You had allies this whole time. Not allies, she corrected. Survivors. The older man studied her closely. You're bleeding again. I'll live. Stubborn, he murmured. Still, he turned to the Duke. You're no longer safe anywhere the crown can see. I've noticed, the Duke replied dryly. There is a place, the man continued. Beyond borders. Beyond titles. The Duke frowned. Exile. Sanctuary, the man corrected. If you survive the journey. She knew what the man was offering, and what it would cost. Say it, she said. The Black Pass, he said. 3 days north. Old routes. No banners. The Duke looked to her. Is it real? Yes, she said. And no one goes there by accident. The man's gaze hardened. Your enemies already move that way. They believe you'll run south. Good, she said. Let them. The rain began to ease, mist rising from the ground. You can't come with us, the man said to her quietly. She stiffened. Why? Because you're known, he replied. And because they will follow you, not him. The Duke's head snapped toward her. What does he mean? She did not answer immediately. If you stay with me, the Duke said slowly, you die. And if I leave, she replied, you might live. Silence stretched thin. The man placed a small object into her hand, a token carved from bone, worn smooth by time. If you survive, he said, burn this. We'll find you. She closed her fingers around it. If I don't, he shrugged, then you won't need us. The Duke took a step closer to her. You're not abandoning me. I'm not, she said softly. I'm drawing the fire. He shook his head. That's suicide. No, she said. That's strategy. The older man was already signaling his people to move. They faded back into the trees as silently as they had appeared. You have an hour, he said over his shoulder. Then every road here fills with blood. When they were alone again, the Duke looked at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. You planned this, he said. I prepared for it, she replied. There's a difference. You're going to lead them away, he said. Yes. And you think I'll let you? He asked. She met his gaze steadily. You don't get a choice. His jaw tightened. I won't be a king who survives because others die for him. You already are, she said. You just didn't see it. That cut deeper than any blade. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. If you reach the Black Pass, there are people there who still believe in what the kingdom could be, not what it is. And you? He asked. She smiled faintly. I'll be busy. He reached out, gripping her arm gently but firmly. If you die, I won't, she said. But if I do, remember this wasn't sacrifice. It was choice. He released her slowly. They separated at dawn. He took the northern trail, cloaked and unremarkable, just another man fleeing the consequences of power. She took the east into territory that knew her name and wanted her blood. By midday, she felt them following. By nightfall, they showed themselves. Riders this time. Organized. Silent. Better trained than the ones before. Good, she thought. That meant the Duke had time. She led them through marsh and ruin, through places where maps lied and instincts failed. She killed when necessary, vanished when possible. She slept in fragments, ate little, moved constantly. On the third night, exhaustion caught up with her. She collapsed near an abandoned watchtower, vision blurring, breath shallow. Blood soaked her side where a wound had reopened. The world tilted. Footsteps approached. She forced herself upright, blade shaking in her hand. A figure stepped into the moonlight. Not an enemy. The Duke. Her breath caught. You're an idiot, she rasped. He knelt beside her without hesitation. You're not allowed to decide that alone. They'll be close, she warned. I know, he said. I sent them the wrong way. She stared at him. Ow, I learned from you, he replied simply. Torches flared in the distance. She laughed weakly. Then we're both going to die. He helped her stand. Maybe, but not quietly. And as they disappeared into the ruined tower together, The kingdom shifted once more, pulled not by crowns or councils, but by two people who refused to vanish on someone else's terms. The watchtower was older than the kingdom that pretended it owned the land. Its stones were split and blackened by time, its spiral stairs half collapsed, but its bones were strong, strong enough to make a stand, or a last mistake. She leaned heavily against the inner wall as the Duke barred the door with what remained of a rotted beam. Her breath came shallow, each inhale a reminder that pain could be postponed but never denied forever. "You should have kept going," she said. "You had a chance." "So did you," he replied, "and you chose not to take it." He tore cloth from his cloak, pressing it firmly against her wound. She hissed, but did not pull away. "They won't stop," she said. "Not now." "I know," he answered. "That's why we don't run." Outside, the sound of horses circled the tower, deliberate and slow. No shouting, no threats. Professionals. They were being measured. "You recognize them?" the Duke asked. "Yes," she said. "Different branch. Same tree." She forced herself upright, testing her balance. The dizziness had not won yet. That mattered. "There's a signal fire platform at the top," she said. "Collapsed, but usable." "For what?" he asked. "For lying," she replied. They climbed carefully, step by broken step, until they reached the open top. The night wind cut sharp, carrying the smell of damp iron and pine. Below them, torches bloomed in a widening circle. One rider dismounted and stepped forward into the firelight. His armor was unmarked, his face calm. "You're surrounded," he called. Again, she almost smiled. "Your people love repetition," she called back. "It makes you predictable." "You've cost us time," the man replied. "Lives. Resources. Then we're even," she said. The Duke stepped beside her, visible now. A murmur rippled through the riders. The man looked up at him. "Your Grace. Come down. This doesn't end well." The Duke's voice carried, steady despite everything. "It already ended when you chose to rule from behind knives." Lumen sighed. Idealism from a fugitive. He raised his hand. She moved instantly, striking flint against steel, sparks catching the oil-soaked cloth she had placed moments earlier. Flame leapt up, bright and sudden, roaring into the sky. A signal, not to summon help, to spread information. The riders reacted immediately, some shouting orders, others backing away. Fire meant attention. Smoke meant witnesses. "You think that saves you?" the man called. "No," she said, "but it complicates you." Arrows flew, stone chipped. One grazed her leg, tearing skin. She ignored it, dragging the Duke down as another struck where his head had been. They retreated down the stairs as the door below shuddered under impact. "They'll breach," the Duke said. "Yes," she replied, "which is why we won't be here." She led him to a narrow opening on the tower's far side, hidden by ivy and shadow. A rope, old frayed but intact, hung down the exterior wall. "You planned this too?" he asked. "I hope," she said again. They descended as the door splintered above them. Boots thundered inside the tower. Shouts echoed. They hit the ground running, disappearing into the ravine beyond just as arrows rained uselessly behind them. They did not stop until dawn burned the sky pale and unforgiving. By then, she could barely stand. They collapsed near a riverbank, water rushing fast and cold. The Duke knelt beside her, panic finally breaking through his control. "You're dying," he said. "Not yet," she whispered. "But I will if we stay." He looked around wildly. "There's nothing here." "There is," she murmured, pointing weakly. "Under the water. Follow the bend." He did not question her. He half carried her into the river, the shock of cold stealing what breath she had left. Beneath the surface, hidden by current and reeds, was a stone culvert leading into darkness. They emerged inside an old smuggling tunnel, the air stale but dry. The Duke dragged her farther in, collapsing beside her as the river noise masked them completely. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she laughed softly. "What?" he asked. "I spent my life running from places like this," she said. "Funny where you end up." He pressed his forehead against the stone, shaking. "I almost lost you." She turned her head toward him. "You still might." He met her gaze, raw and unguarded. "Then tell me what I don't know." She was quiet for a long moment. My real name, she said finally, is written on a list very few people have ever seen. A list of what? He asked. Of weapons, she replied. Not forged. Trained. Understanding dawned slowly on his face. You weren't just taught to survive, he said. You were built to dismantle. Yes, she said. Kings. Wars. Entire bloodlines. And you escaped, he said. I broke, she corrected. Escaping implies permission. Silence settled again, heavier now. They will never stop, he said. No, she agreed. But neither will I. He shifted closer, careful of her wounds. Then stop pushing me away. She closed her eyes briefly. I'm not pushing you away. I'm keeping you alive. You don't get to decide that alone anymore, he said. Footsteps echoed faintly somewhere beyond the tunnel. She opened her eyes. They're closer than I thought. The Duke stood, drawing a blade he had taken from a fallen rider. Then we end this. She struggled to her feet, leaning on him. Not here. Where then? He asked. She smiled faintly, blood on her lips. At the place they forgot to erase. They moved deeper into the tunnel, toward a city beneath the city, toward secrets buried long before crowns learned to wear gold. Behind them, the hunters followed. Ahead of them, something waited that would change the war entirely. And for the first time since this began, she felt it clearly. They were no longer running out of time. They were running toward it. The tunnel widened as they moved deeper, the rough stone giving way to old brickwork darkened by age and moisture. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying the scent of rust and forgotten water. Somewhere above them, the living city breathed. Markets opening, bells ringing, people unaware that beneath their feet, a war was crawling through the dark. She leaned harder against the Duke now, every step costing more than the last. Blood loss dulled the edges of pain, but sharpened everything else, turning sounds into blades and light into threats. Almost there, she murmured, more to herself than to him. You've said that 3 times, he replied, though there was no accusation in his voice. Because it's true in different ways, she said. They reached a rusted iron gate half submerged in shadow. She stopped, breath hitching, and reached beneath a loose stone in the wall. Her fingers closed around cold metal. A key. Old. Heavy. The Duke watched closely. You planned this long before me. I planned survival, she said, fitting the key into the lock. You were an unexpected variable. The gate creaked open, the sound echoing like a warning shot. Beyond it lay a chamber vast enough to swallow torchlight, its ceiling supported by thick pillars etched with symbols long stripped of meaning. Broken crates, rotted carts, and the bones of old infrastructure littered the floor. This was a hub once, she said quietly, before the crown decided some truths were better buried. They moved inside as the gate fell shut behind them. The Duke lowered her gently onto a stone bench. Sit. If you fall again, you might not stand up. She did not argue. Her hands trembled now, betraying the strain she had been denying. Who built this place? He asked. She closed her eyes briefly. People who understood that power never truly disappears. It just changes where it hides. Footsteps echoed faintly beyond the gate. They're here, he said. Yes, she replied. And they're careful now. She forced herself upright again. Listen to me. What's about to happen wasn't meant for you. Everything since the ballroom wasn't meant for me, he said. I'm still here. She met his gaze, something unspoken tightening between them. If they breach this chamber, they'll kill you first. He nodded. Because I matter to the story they're writing. Exactly, she said. And because you matter, you cannot be seen here. She moved to a section of wall marked with faded lines. Pressed. Stone shifted inward silently, revealing a narrow passage just wide enough for one person. No, he said immediately. You have to, she replied. This leads to the lower districts. Crowded. Chaotic. You'll disappear. And you? He asked. I'll stay, she said. I belong to what comes next. The footsteps outside grew louder. Metal scraped. Voices whispered. He grabbed her wrist gently but firmly. You're not a ghost, he said. You're bleeding. She smiled faintly. I've bled before. You won't survive this, he said. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Survival isn't always about breathing. The gate shuddered as something heavy struck it. Go, she said. He hesitated only a second longer, then stepped into the passage. Before disappearing, he turned back. When this ends, he said, I'll come looking for you. She held his gaze. Then make sure there's still a kingdom worth finding. The passage sealed shut. She exhaled slowly, then turned toward the gate. It burst inward moments later. They flooded the chamber in disciplined formation, blades ready, eyes sharp. At least a dozen, maybe more. The man who stepped forward wore no armor at all, only dark leather and confidence. You always did like dramatic places, he said. She straightened, every remaining ounce of strength pulling her upright. You always did like numbers. Efficiency, he corrected. You could have had that. I chose freedom, she replied. He glanced around the chamber. Did you? She did not answer. They circled slowly, testing distance, reading posture. He was good, better than most. That was why he had survived long enough to stand here. You're injured, he said. This doesn't end well for you. It never does, she replied. Yet here I am. He raised a hand. The others advanced. She moved. Pain vanished beneath instinct. She used pillars for cover, shadows for misdirection, momentum instead of strength. One fell, then another. She drove a blade into a thigh, cracked a knee, crushed a throat with her elbow. Blood slicked the ancient floor, mixing with dust and water. But they adapted quickly. A blow caught her side, reopening the wound. Her vision blurred. She stumbled, barely recovering before another strike glanced off her shoulder. The man stepped in, blade precise, deadly calm. Their weapons met with a shriek of metal. You can't win, he said softly, pressing the attack. I don't need to, she replied. She stepped back deliberately, retreating toward the far end of the chamber. He followed, sensing advantage. Then the floor beneath him collapsed. The old stone gave way exactly where she needed it to, swallowing him and two others into darkness below. Their screams echoed briefly, then ended. She staggered, breath tearing from her lungs. The remaining hunters hesitated. Leave, she said hoarsely, or join them. They did not need to be told twice. One by one, they backed away, dragging their wounded, vanishing through the shattered gate. Silence returned, broken only by her ragged breathing. She sank to her knees. Minutes passed, or hours. Time lost meaning. When she woke again, light filtered faintly through cracks above. She was not alone. A woman knelt beside her, pressing clean cloth to her wound. Easy, the woman said. You're safe. Safe was a word she had learned not to trust. Who are you? She whispered. The woman smiled faintly. Someone who remembers your name. She stiffened. That's not possible. Nothing stays buried forever, the woman replied. Especially weapons. She looked around weakly. More figures stood nearby, watching with quiet intensity. Not hunters. Not soldiers. What do you want? She asked. To finish what you started, the woman said. And to remind the world why it learned to fear the dark in the first place. Above them, the city continued its morning routine, unaware that beneath its streets, something ancient had just chosen to wake up. And far away, moving through crowded alleys toward uncertain allies, the Duke felt it too. The shift, the moment when survival turned into rebellion, when running ended, and the hunt reversed. The chamber did not feel empty anymore. It felt awake. She lay on a pallet of old blankets while the woman worked carefully, stitching torn flesh with steady hands that showed no hesitation. The pain was sharp, focused, real, but it meant she was still alive. Around them, others moved quietly, speaking in murmurs, their presence controlled, deliberate. No insignias, no banners, just people who knew how to exist without being noticed. You shouldn't have survived that, the woman said without looking up. I hear that often, she replied hoarsely. The woman's mouth curved slightly. Then you already know why we're here. She turned her head, studying the faces around her. Men and women of different ages, different histories, but the same eyes. Eyes that had seen systems break and learned how to break them first. You're not supposed to exist, she said. We were erased, the woman corrected. There's a difference. Memory stirred, names half forgotten, training halls burned from maps, instructors who vanished overnight. She swallowed. "You're the remnants," she said. "Yes," the woman replied. "And you're the proof that erasure failed." Silence settled, heavy with implication. "Where is he?" she asked suddenly. The woman met her gaze. "Safe. For now." Relief hit harder than pain. She closed her eyes briefly, then forced them open again. "Then we don't have time." "We know," the woman said. "The council has accelerated its purge. They're afraid." "They should be," she replied. Hours later, she stood again, unsteady, supported but standing. Fresh bandages bound her side and arm. Clean clothes replaced blood-soaked ones. Someone had even returned her blade, cleaned and sharpened. "You always were difficult to kill," a man said from the shadows. She turned sharply. "You." He stepped forward, older now, lines etched deep into his face, but unmistakable. "I wonder when you'd notice." "You were supposed to be dead," she said. "So were you," he replied. "Yet here we are." Anger flared. "You left." "I survived," he said evenly. "Same as you." The woman intervened gently. "This isn't the time." "No," she agreed. "It's not. Tell me what you've built." They moved deeper underground into a chamber filled with maps, ledgers, and coded symbols. The air hummed with quiet purpose. "This," the woman said, gesturing around, "is what happens when people the crown tried to erase choose to remember each other." She studied the maps, supply routes, guard rotations, names circled in red. "You're planning more than survival," she said. "Yes," the woman replied. "We're planning correction." "And you waited for me," she said. "We waited for a trigger," the man answered. "You just happened to pull it." Above ground, the city began to change. Rumors spread first, quiet, contradictory stories that made people pause. Then came interruptions, arrests that failed, orders that never reached their destination, guards reassigned only to find their replacements missing. In the palace, the council argued. In private, they panicked. The Duke felt it in every alley he passed through, every whispered conversation that stopped when he drew near. People who once looked away now watched him closely, not with fear, with curiosity. A boy slipped him a folded note near the market. One line only. "She lives. Stay visible." He exhaled slowly, folding the paper into nothing. Beneath the city, she stood before the remnants and spoke for the first time. "They taught us to dismantle quietly," she said, "to remove a piece and let the structure collapse on its own." Faces watched her intently. "But quiet only works when the world is listening," she continued. "They're not listening anymore." Murmurs spread. "So we remind them," she said, "not with chaos, with truth sharpened into inevitability." The woman beside her nodded. "Targets." She pointed to the map. "Not the council first. Their protectors. Their money. Their confidence." "And the Duke?" someone asked. She paused. "He becomes the question they can't silence." Above them, bells rang, emergency summons echoing through the capital. She smiled faintly. "Good," she said. "They've noticed." That night, fires burned in places that weren't supposed to burn. Vaults were emptied. Documents vanished. Names were spoken aloud that had been buried for decades. By dawn, the kingdom was awake. And for the first time in generations, it was afraid of what it had created and failed to kill. She stood at the edge of the underground chamber, bloodied, scarred, unbroken. The weapon they tried to erase had stopped running, and now it was aiming. The capital woke to a different rhythm. It was subtle at first, almost polite. Guards arrived late to posts they had never missed before. Couriers found sealed doors where offices should have been. Account ledgers no longer matched vault contents. Nothing loud, nothing obvious, just enough imbalance to make careful men uneasy. She watched it unfold from beneath the streets, fingers tracing the map like a living thing. Every mark they erased above ground echoed below in quiet satisfaction. "They're reacting faster than expected," the woman beside her said. "Fear accelerates thought," she replied. "It doesn't improve it." A runner arrived breathless, rain-soaked. The western barracks went dark. No resistance. They surrendered. A murmur rippled through the chamber. "Good," she said. "That means they're listening." "And the council?" the man asked. "They'll hide behind process," she replied, "until process fails them." Above ground, The Duke moved carefully through the city, not hiding, not declaring. Visibility was his weapon now. Every street he walked became a rumor. Every conversation that noticed him turned into a question. Is he alive? If he's alive, why? A merchant bowed too deeply. A baker pressed bread into his hands without payment. A guard looked away instead of raising an alarm. He felt the shift like a tide changing direction. At the palace, the council chamber was sealed, voices raised behind locked doors. "This is insurrection," one voice hissed. "No," another snapped. "This is infection. They have no banner." "That's worse," a third replied. "You can't burn what you can't name." Orders were issued, then contradicted. Messengers sent, then never returned. And beneath it all, a single question circled like a vulture. "Where is she?" She felt it too. "They're narrowing in," the woman said quietly. "Yes," she replied. "Which means it's time." "For what?" the man asked. She folded the map, eyes hard. "For the truth they buried to walk into daylight." They moved before dawn. The old archive sat beneath the palace, sealed by tradition and neglect. Officially, it no longer existed. Unofficially, it contained every lie the crown had ever sworn never happened. They entered without resistance. The guard were already gone. Inside, dust hung thick, undisturbed for years. Shelves groaned under the weight of forgotten history. She walked directly to the far wall, pressing a specific stone. Mechanisms clicked. A hidden chamber opened. Inside were lists. Names. Dates. Children taken. Trained. Disappeared. She closed her eyes briefly. "Copy everything," she said. "Then burn what they wanted forgotten." By mid-morning, the city erupted, not in fire, but in voices. Pamphlets appeared. Documents nailed to doors. Names shouted in marketplaces. Mothers recognized handwriting. Fathers recognized signatures. The crown had not just ruled. It had harvested. The Duke stood on the steps of the old courthouse as the crowd gathered, restless, angry, awake. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "They told you I fled because I was guilty," he said. "If that were true, why did they erase the evidence instead of showing it?" Silence pressed close. "They told you the past was settled," he continued. "If that were true, why are they afraid of paper?" A stone struck the palace gate. Then another. Inside, the council broke. "They have the archive," someone whispered. "Kill them," another snapped. "You can't," a third replied. "They already told the city who we are." Soldiers refused orders. Messengers defected. And when the gates finally opened, it was not an army that entered. It was the people. She watched from the shadows as the council was dragged into the light, screaming about legality, about order, about chaos. "Order without truth is just silence," she murmured. The Duke found her after. Among the ruins of authority, amid torn banners and broken seals, he saw her standing exactly where she had always belonged, between collapse and possibility. "You did this," he said quietly. "We did," she replied. He studied her, really studied her, scars and all. "What happens now?" She looked at the city, at the people who were no longer looking away. "Now comes the part no one trained you as for." "What part?" he asked. "Building something that doesn't need people like me to survive." Sirens rang in the distance. Not alarms, but calls for assembly. The kingdom had reached the moment it could not undo. And for the first time, she wondered, not whether she would live through what came next, but whether she would be allowed to disappear once it was over. The capital woke to a different rhythm. It was subtle at first, almost polite. Guards arrived late to posts they had never missed before. Couriers found sealed doors where offices should have been. Account ledgers no longer matched vault contents. Nothing loud, nothing obvious, just enough imbalance to make careful men uneasy. She watched it unfold from beneath the streets, fingers tracing the map like a living thing. Every mark they erased above ground echoed below in quiet satisfaction. "They're reacting faster than expected," the woman beside her said. "Fear accelerates thought," she replied. "It doesn't improve it." A runner arrived breathless, rain-soaked. The western barracks went dark. No resistance. They surrendered. A murmur rippled through the chamber. "Good," she said. "That means they're listening." "And the council?" the man asked. They'll hide behind process, she replied, until process fails them. Above ground, the Duke moved carefully through the city, not hiding, not declaring. Visibility was his weapon now. Every street he walked became a rumor. Every conversation that noticed him turned into a question. Is he alive? If he's alive, why? A merchant bowed too deeply. A baker pressed bread into his hands without payment. A guard looked away instead of raising an alarm. He felt the shift like a tide changing direction. At the palace, the council chamber was sealed, voices raised behind locked doors. This is insurrection, one voice hissed. No, another snapped. This is infection. They have no banner. That's worse, a third replied. You can't burn what you can't name. Orders were issued, then contradicted. Messengers sent, then never returned. And beneath it all, a single question circled like a vulture. Where is she? She felt it too. They're narrowing in, the woman said quietly. Yes, she replied, which means it's time. For what? The man asked. She folded the map, eyes hard. For the truth they buried to walk into daylight. They moved before dawn. The old archive sat beneath the palace, sealed by tradition and neglect. Officially, it no longer existed. Unofficially, it contained every lie the crown had ever sworn never happened. They entered without resistance. The guards were already gone. Inside, dust hung thick, undisturbed for years. Shelves groaned under the weight of forgotten history. She walked directly to the far wall, pressing a specific stone. Mechanisms clicked. A hidden chamber opened. Inside were lists. Names. Dates. Children taken. Trained. Disappeared. She closed her eyes briefly. Copy everything, she said. Then burn what they wanted forgotten. By mid-morning, the city erupted, not in fire, but in voices. Pamphlets appeared. Documents nailed to doors. Names shouted in marketplaces. Mothers recognized handwriting. Fathers recognized signatures. The crown had not just ruled. It had harvested. The Duke stood on the steps of the old courthouse as the crowd gathered, restless, angry, awake. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. They told you I fled because I was guilty, he said. If that were true, why did they erase the evidence instead of showing it? Silence pressed close. They told you the past was settled, he continued. If that were true, why are they afraid of paper? A stone struck the palace gate. Then another. Inside, the council broke. They have the archive, someone whispered. Kill them. Another snapped. You can't, a third replied. They already told the city who we are. Soldiers refused orders. Messengers defected. And when the gates finally opened, it was not an army that entered. It was the people. She watched from the shadows as the council was dragged into the light, screaming about legality, about order, about chaos. Order without truth is just silence, she murmured. The Duke found her after. Among the ruins of authority, amid torn banners and broken seals, he saw her standing exactly where she had always belonged, between collapse and possibility. You did this, he said quietly. We did, she replied. He studied her, really studied her, scars and all. What happens now? She looked at the city, at the people who were no longer looking away. Now comes the part no one trained us for. What part, he asked. Building something that doesn't need people like me to survive. Sirens rang in the distance. Not alarms, but calls for assembly. The kingdom had reached the moment it could not undo. And for the first time, she wondered, not whether she would live through what came next, but whether she would be allowed to disappear once it was over. The assembly filled the square until there was nowhere left to stand. People crowded windows, rooftops, balconies, faces drawn by anger, grief, hope, and something far more dangerous, expectation. The old banners lay trampled beneath boots and blood, their symbols meaningless now. The palace gates remained open, not as an invitation, but as a wound that could not be closed again. She watched from the edge of the crowd, hood low, senses stretched thin. This was the moment revolutions fractured or hardened, when voices replaced whispers, and everyone believed they deserved to be heard at once. The Duke stood at the center, no longer elevated, no longer guarded by walls. Just a man among thousands. They shouted questions, accusations, demands. What happens to them? Who decides now? Can we trust you? He raised a hand slowly. The noise faded, not because he commanded it, but because they wanted to hear what came next. I will not rule you alone, he said, and I will not pretend the crown can be repaired by changing who wears it. Murmurs spread. The council is gone, he continued. The archive is open. What you do with that truth is no longer my decision. A woman near the front shouted. Then why are you here? He met her gaze. Because someone has to stand where the lie used to be until something better grows. She felt the weight of that sentence. It was not a promise. It was a burden. From the palace steps, a voice cut through the crowd. Sharp, controlled. And who decided you were worthy of that space? She turned. A man stepped forward, flanked by soldiers still wearing the old colors. His posture was rigid, his expression carved from certainty. She recognized him immediately. The marshal. He had been quiet through all of this. Too quiet. The Duke did not turn away. I didn't decide, he said. They did. The marshal smiled thinly. Crowds are easy to move, harder to govern. He raised a sealed document. The military remains intact. By law, authority defaults to command until stability is restored. A ripple of unease moved through the square. She stepped forward without thinking, then stopped. This was not her moment. Not yet. The Duke spoke again. You're offering order. I'm offering survival, the marshal replied. You've shown them fire. I'll keep it from spreading. Soldiers shifted subtly behind him. The woman beside her whispered. This is the fracture. Yes, she replied. And he's trying to widen it. The Duke's voice hardened. At the cost of truth. At the cost of chaos, the marshal said. Which one do you think kills more people? Silence stretched thin. Then a voice rose from the crowd. Old, trembling, furious. My son is on that list. Another followed. My sister. My father. The marshal's jaw tightened. Grief does not grant authority. No, she said, stepping forward now, had fallen back. But it removes your disguise. Every eye turned to her. A hush fell instinctive deep. The marshal stared. Recognition flickered. And fear. You, he said. Yes, she replied calmly. Me? The Duke turned sharply. You shouldn't. She lifted a hand. This ends now. She faced the crowd, voice steady despite everything screaming inside her. He's right about one thing. Chaos kills, but so does silence. And you've been silent long enough. She turned back to the marshal. You knew. He did not deny it. I contained it. You fed it, she said. You protected the system that made children into tools and called it security. His expression hardened. I kept the kingdom alive. You kept it obedient, she replied. There's a difference. The soldiers behind him hesitated. Not much, but enough. You think exposing what makes you righteous? The marshal asked. What happens when they turn on you next? She smiled faintly. Then they're finally paying attention. The Duke stepped beside her. Stand down. The marshal looked at him with something like pity. You don't understand power. She leaned closer, voice low. You understand it perfectly. You're just afraid of losing control. The marshal raised his hand. No one moved. Not the soldiers. Not the crowd. The moment hung, fragile and absolute. Then one soldier stepped forward and removed his insignia, letting it fall to the stone. Another followed, and another. The marshal's hand trembled. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, she agreed. But it is decided. He backed away slowly, disappearing into the palace with the few who still followed him. The square exhaled. Later, when the crowd dispersed into arguments, plans, and raw possibility, she stood alone on the palace balcony. The Duke joined her, the city stretching endlessly below. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, she replied. I did. He studied her. What happens to you now? She considered the question carefully. That depends on whether they learn the right lesson. And if they don't, he asked. She looked out at the city, eyes sharp, tired, alive. Then I remind them again. He nodded slowly. You won't stay. No, she said. People like me are warnings, not foundations. A bell rang somewhere below, not in alarm, but in gathering. The future was assembling itself, messy and loud. She pulled her hood up once more. Behind her, The Duke watched the city take its first uncertain breath without chains. Ahead of her, shadows waited, and for the first time, she walked toward them not as a weapon, but as a choice. The city did not sleep that night. Fires burned in courtyards not for warmth, but for light. Circles formed in streets where strangers argued like family, voices rising, falling, breaking, rebuilding. Someone rang the old bells every hour, not to mark time, but to remind everyone that time was moving forward whether they were ready or not. She moved through it unseen. This was the cost of truth, not the uprising. That part was easy. The harder part was what followed, when people realized freedom did not arrive with instructions. At the edge of the lower district, she entered a half-collapsed watchtower that once belonged to the inner guard. Maps covered the walls now, pinned and rewritten, hands from different lives shaping the same uncertain future. "They're forming councils by district," the woman from the underground said, looking up as she entered. "Messy ones." "Good," she replied. "Order that arrives too cleanly is usually hiding something." "And the Duke? He's still standing where the lie used to be," she said. "That position erodes quickly." The woman hesitated. "The marshal didn't leave the city." "I know," she said. A shadow crossed her thoughts. The marshal did not run because he still believed in inevitability. Men like him always did. She turned to the map. "He'll try to fracture the army first. Then the food supply. Fear is easier to organize than hope. And if he succeeds?" She met the woman's eyes. "Then the city bleeds until it learns." Before dawn, the first fracture appeared. A convoy of grain wagons failed to arrive from the southern road. By mid-morning, rumors spread faster than facts. Hoarding began. Accusations followed. By noon, a fight broke out near the river markets. She arrived before it turned lethal. Two groups stood facing each other, fists clenched, voices sharp with hunger and suspicion. "They're stealing," someone shouted. "They're lying," another answered. She stepped between them. "Stop," she said, not loudly, but with the kind of certainty that did not invite argument. They recognized her. Some immediately, others only after silence spread outward. "This is how it starts," she said. "Not with soldiers, with neighbors." A man spat on the ground. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one with children." She looked at him steadily. "I was a child when they decided fear mattered more than people." The words landed heavy. "The grain didn't vanish," she continued. "It was redirected, on the marshal's order." Murmurs rippled. "He's testing you," she said, "seeing how fast you'll turn on each other." A woman near the back whispered, "So what do we do?" She paused. This mattered. "You share," she said finally. "Not because it's fair, because it's strategic." Confusion flickered. "Hunger makes you predictable," she explained. "Predictable people are easy to control." Slowly, tension eased. Crates were opened. Measures adjusted. No one smiled, but no one drew blood either. By evening, the Duke called for her. He looked older already, the weight of responsibility carving lines where confidence used to be. "You were right," he said without preamble. "He's moving." "Yes," she replied. "And you're still breathing. That means he hasn't decided to break you publicly yet." "That's supposed to be comforting." "No," she said. "It's supposed to make you careful." He leaned against the table. "They're asking me to lead." She studied him. And I don't know where leadership ends and control begins," he admitted. She softened slightly. "That's the right fear." Silence stretched. "I need you," he said finally. She met his gaze. "No, you need what I represent." "And what's the difference?" She stepped closer. "One stays. The other leaves before it becomes indispensable." Understanding flickered, and pain. "When?" he asked. "Soon," she said, "before they start confusing gratitude with permission." Outside, the city shifted again, learning through trial and friction. That night, the marshal struck openly. A fire erupted in the eastern storehouses. Controlled, targeted, just enough to remind everyone how fragile stability really was. From a rooftop, she watched the flames climb into the dark. "He wants you to beg for order," the woman beside her said. "Yes," she replied. "And tomorrow, he'll offer it, on his terms." She turned away from the fire. "Then we don't give him tomorrow," she said. Below them, bells rang again, not in panic but in warning. The city was learning the sound of its own heartbeat. And for the first time, she wondered whether it could survive without her shadow guiding it, or whether the final lesson would require one last descent into darkness. Dawn arrived bruised and red. Smoke still clung to the eastern sky where the storehouses had burned, a reminder written in ash. People gathered in the streets, not in panic, but in calculation. They were learning. Slowly, painfully, exactly as revolutions always did. She moved before anyone noticed she was gone. The marshal's mistake was believing control required visibility. Men like him always needed to be seen giving orders, issuing consequences, shaping outcomes with deliberate hands. He could not imagine a threat that chose absence as a weapon. She knew where he would go next. The old command spire overlooked the river junction, abandoned officially, operational in practice. It was where military loyalty had been reinforced for decades, through ritual, reward, and fear. If he could re-anchor the army there, the city would follow whether it wanted to or not. She entered through the lower tunnels, the ones built for evacuation and never used. Dust coated the steps. The air smelled like iron and old oaths. Above her, voices echoed. Temporary authority, the marshal was saying, until civilian structures stabilize. A lieutenant replied, uncertain. The districts won't accept it. They don't need to, the marshal answered. They need food. And safety. She smiled faintly in the dark. Always the same argument, as if survival were something only force could provide. She reached the inner chamber just as the marshal finished speaking. Officers stood in a loose semicircle around him, expressions tight, torn between habit and doubt. Maps were spread across the table, supply routes marked in red. She stepped into the light. Conversation died instantly. The marshal turned slowly. His face did not register shock, only resignation. I wonder when you'd come, he said. You should have wondered why I waited, she replied. Several officers reached for weapons. She did not move. If anyone draws steel, she said calmly, you'll be explaining to the city why you killed the woman who exposed the archive. Hands froze. The marshal lifted a hand. Stand down. They obeyed, not because of rank, but because of uncertainty. She walked to the table, eyes scanning the maps. You're planning to choke the river districts. They're the loudest, he replied. Hunger quiets outrage, and obedience rots loyalty, she said. You taught me that. A flicker of something crossed his face. Memory. Regret, perhaps. He crushed it quickly. You don't understand what happens when systems collapse, he said. People beg for cages. They beg for relief, she corrected. You just happen to sell chains. One of the younger officers spoke up, voice tight. Sir, is it true? About the children? The marshal did not look at him. It was necessary. Silence fell heavy. She turned to the officer. He told you it was for the kingdom. The officer swallowed. Wasn't it? She met his gaze. If it were, it wouldn't need to be hidden. The marshal's voice sharpened. You think truth absolves you? You trained in the same system. You benefited from the same machinery. Yes, she said simply. That's why I'm dismantling it. He laughed softly. You're arrogant. No, she replied. I'm finished. She reached into her coat and placed a small device on the table. The room stiffened. What is that? The marshal asked. Proof, she said, of your contingency. He stared at it, eyes narrowing. Impossible. You forgot one thing, she continued. You trained me to think several moves ahead. You just didn't expect me to use it against you. She tapped the device. A series of shutters opened along the chamber walls. Light spilled in, along with sound. Outside, in the square below the spire, thousands of people stood watching, listening. Every word spoken in the chamber now echoed across the city. The marshal's breath caught. She raised her voice slightly, just enough. Tell them, she said. Tell them about the emergency protocols, the fabricated threats, the manufactured shortages. The crowd stirred. You won't, he said tightly. Because chaos is already here, she cut in. The only question is who owns it. She turned to the officers. You were told loyalty meant silence. It doesn't. It means responsibility. One by one, they looked away from the marshal. A voice from the crowd rose up, amplified by the spire's acoustics. "We hear you." Another followed. "No more shadows." The marshal's composure cracked. "Just a fracture. Enough." "You think I'll thank you?" he snapped. "They'll tear everything down and blame you when it hurts." "Maybe," she said, "but at least the pain won't be a lie." Sirens sounded, not alarms but calls. The Duke's signal, agreed upon in quiet planning. The city was assembling again. The marshal straightened, gathering what remained of his authority. "This ends with force," he said. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "No, it ends with choice. Yours." He searched her face, looking for hesitation. There was none. Slowly, he removed the insignia from his coat and placed it on the table. The sound echoed louder than any shout. A gasp rippled through the square. He turned to the officers. "You're dismissed." For a moment, no one moved. Then one officer saluted, not him, but the city beyond the walls. The marshal walked past her without another word, disappearing into the lower corridors alone. She watched him go, not with triumph, but with a quiet exhaustion that settled deep in her bones. Outside, the crowd surged, not violently, but with purpose. The Duke stood, waiting at the base of a spire when she emerged. "It's done," he said. "It's begun," she corrected. He looked at her carefully. "They're asking for you." She shook her head. "They're asking for certainty. Don't give them a person. Give them process." He nodded, understanding hard-earned. "And you?" She glanced back at the spire, at the system finally speaking in daylight. "I'll leave before they forget why they stood up." He hesitated. "You could stay." She met his eyes. "If I stay, they'll build around me. And then we're right back where we started." Silence stretched between them, full of things neither would say. She turned away before it could anchor her. As she moved through the streets one last time, she saw people arguing, organizing, failing, trying again. It was imperfect. It was loud. It was alive. Above them, the smoke thinned. The city was no longer waiting to be saved. And that, more than any victory, told her she had done what she came to do. By nightfall, she was gone. But her absence was no longer a shadow. It was a space others were finally brave enough to fill. Weeks passed, and the city learned how heavy freedom could be. Without a single ruler to blame or praise, responsibility spread like an unfamiliar muscle, aching, weak, but growing stronger with use. District councils argued endlessly. Decisions took longer. Mistakes were made in public. And yet, something fundamental had shifted. When things went wrong, people no longer whispered. They confronted. From the northern hills, she watched the city change. She had taken refuge in an abandoned signal post overlooking the river valley, far enough to be gone, close enough to observe. Leaving had not been clean. It never was. Every road away carried echoes of unfinished conversations, unspoken gratitude, and resentment she had chosen not to absorb. This distance was necessary. "Reports?" she asked the messenger who had climbed the hill before dawn. The young man hesitated, then handed her a folded packet. "The councils passed the food charter. Shared reserves. Rotational oversight." She nodded. "And the army?" "Fragmented," he admitted, "but loyal to the city. Not a single command anymore." "That's dangerous," she said. "Yes," he replied, "but also harder to corrupt." She allowed herself a thin smile. "And the Duke?" she asked. "He refused the title they offered," the messenger said. "Publicly. Said no one should be irreplaceable." That surprised her, not because he lacked ambition, but because refusing power was harder than claiming it. "Good," she said quietly. The messenger shifted, uncertain. "They still talk about you." She turned away, gaze fixed on the city far below. "That will fade." He didn't look convinced. "Some say you'll come back if things fall apart." "That's a dangerous myth," she replied. "Tell them I won't." He nodded, though disappointment flickered across his face. After he left, silence reclaimed the hilltop. She breathed deeply, feeling the unfamiliar weight of not being needed. It was unsettling and honest. But systems did not dismantle themselves cleanly. Beyond the eastern border, forces gathered quietly. Trade lords who had profited from the old order. exiled nobles who had lost influence overnight. They watched the city not with outrage, but with interest. Instability was an invitation. By the third week, the first emissaries arrived. They came under banners of commerce and cooperation, speaking of alliances, protection, mutual benefit. The councils listened, divided between caution and desperation. She learned of it through coded messages, each confirming the same truth. The city was about to face a test it could not argue its way out of. External pressure demanded unity. That night, she broke her silence. She wrote a single letter. No signature, no seal, just words. It was delivered to every council chamber by morning. You do not need a savior. You need a boundary. Negotiate together or fall separately. If you trade your uncertainty for their certainty, you will never get it back. Nothing more. Some dismissed it as paranoia. Others recognized the voice immediately and bristled at being advised by a ghost. But the message worked its way through the city like a slow-burning fuse. When the emissaries returned for formal negotiations, they were met not by one authority, but by many seated together, disagreeing openly, refusing to fracture. The talk stalled. Beyond the border, patience thinned. A month later, the blockade began. Trade routes tightened. River tolls increased. Supplies slowed. Not enough to starve, just enough to strain. Fear crept back in. And with fear came familiar questions. Shouldn't someone be in charge? Wouldn't this be easier with a single voice? She heard these questions echoed in reports, in intercepted letters, in the restless movement of people who had tasted stability and feared losing it. She did not intervene. This lesson could not be taught from the shadows. Inside the city, the Duke walked streets without guards, listening more than speaking. He absorbed blame. He deflected praise. He reminded people, again and again, that leadership was a function, not a crown. It exhausted him. She saw it in his posture when he addressed the assemblies, in the way his voice tightened when debates spiraled. Still, he did not step beyond his role. The blockade tightened. Food prices rose. Tempers flared. One night, a riot nearly broke out in the southern quarter. It ended not with force, but with neighbors forming lines to protect warehouses from both looters and soldiers. That image reached her at dawn. She closed her eyes. They're learning, she thought. Slowly, painfully, the border coalition made its move at the start of winter. A formal ultimatum. Submit to a unified external authority for protection or face full economic isolation. The council split. The vote fractured. No consensus emerged. And for the first time since she left, she felt the city teeter. That night, she returned, not to the city, but to its edge. She stood beneath the old aqueduct where messengers once passed unseen. The cold cut deep. The choice before her cut deeper. If she stepped in now, she could unify them through fear of loss, through clarity sharpened by threat. She could become necessary again. The thought repulsed her. Instead, she sent one final message, this time not written but spoken. She intercepted the border coalition's envoys as they camped outside the city, appearing before them like a rumor made flesh. They stiffened at the sight of her. "You represent nothing," one scoffed. She smiled faintly. "Neither do you. That's why you're here." They threatened. They offered. They underestimated. She gave them information instead. Proof of internal rivalries within their coalition. Evidence of trade dependencies they could not afford to sever. Names of partners already considering withdrawal. "You don't want a broken city," she said calmly. "You want a controllable one." Silence followed. "You won't get either," she continued. "But you can leave with dignity intact." By dawn, the ultimatum was withdrawn. Officially, it was reframed as a pause in negotiations. Unofficially, the coalition had blinked. She vanished again before anyone could follow. When the news reached the city, relief swept through the districts, but something else came with it. Confidence. They had endured pressure without collapsing. They had disagreed without destroying each other. They had survived without a single ruler saving them at the last moment. The Duke stood before the councils that evening and said only this. "Remember this feeling. We earned it together." Far away, she listened to the bells ring. Not in alarm, not in warning, but in recognition. She allowed herself one long breath. The city no longer needed her. And for the first time since her childhood was stolen in the name of order, that truth did not feel like loss. It felt like freedom. Winter settled hard and honest. Snow revealed everything, footprints, patterns, where people walked together and where they avoided one another. The city changed its pace, slowing not from fear, but from calculation. Scarcity sharpened priorities. Excess arguments faded. What remained were questions that mattered. Who decides? How do we correct mistakes? What do we protect at any cost? The councils met less often, but longer. Records were kept publicly now, chalked on stone boards in each district, so no decision could vanish behind doors. It was inefficient. It was exhausting. It worked. From the road north, she watched caravans move again along the riverbanks, lighter than before but steady. Trade resumed cautiously, without grand treaties or permanent promises. Temporary agreements, renewable trust. That was the difference. She had not planned to stay nearby this long. But distance did not mean detachment, and habits built over a lifetime were slow to break. She listened. She mapped. She prepared, less out of necessity, now more out of instinct. One evening, a familiar signal reached her. 3 short flashes from a hilltop fire. She frowned. That code was not supposed to be used again. She arrived before dawn at the meeting point, a frozen clearing between broken stones. The Duke stood there alone, breath fogging the air, cloak pulled tight. "You shouldn't be here," she said flatly. He smiled tiredly. "You taught me to break rules that no longer serve." She studied him, noting the changes. Thinner, sharper, less certain, and more real. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing dramatic," he replied. "Which is the problem?" She waited. "They're starting to look for permanence," he continued. "Structures, titles, something solid enough to stop thinking about everything all the time." "And?" she asked. "And they're not wrong," he admitted. "But they're not right either." She crossed her arms. "You didn't call me out here for philosophy." "No," he said. "I called you because they're asking me to be the anchor." She exhaled slowly. "I said no again," he added quickly. "Publicly. But refusal isn't neutral. It creates pressure. On you," she said. "And on them," he replied. "They think restraint means weakness." She stepped closer. "You're afraid if you don't step forward, someone worse will." "Yes," he said simply. Silence stretched, filled with cold wind and memory. "This is the moment that breaks most revolutions," she said, "when fear of collapse becomes stronger than trust in process." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking you. What does the city still need from me?" She looked at him for a long time. "Nothing heroic," she said finally. "Nothing permanent." "That's not an answer people like," he replied. "Then they'll have to grow," she said. "Or fail." He nodded slowly. "And you?" "I stay gone," she said. "That part hasn't changed." He hesitated. "If it does." She met his eyes. "Then something has gone wrong." They parted without ceremony. No promises. No gratitude spoken aloud. Those things turned into chains if handled carelessly. Spring arrived unevenly. Floods along the lower river forced districts to coordinate faster than debate allowed. Emergency councils formed, temporary authority granted, then dissolved as waters receded. People noticed something important in the aftermath. Power could be borrowed and returned. That realization spread quietly. Children born after the uprising grew up hearing stories that did not end with a throne restored or a tyrant defeated. The endings were messy, less satisfying, more honest. Years passed. The city's borders softened. Influence replaced dominance. Other regions watched carefully, some with admiration, others with suspicion. Attempts to replicate the model failed more often than they succeeded. That was expected. Context mattered. From place to place, she moved when necessary, intervening rarely, anonymously, leaving behind fragments of insight rather than solutions. She refused to lead movements, refused to stay. Her name became rumor, then myth, then cautionary tale. Good. One summer, word reached her that the Duke had fallen ill. Not suddenly, not dramatically. just the slow consequence of years spent absorbing stress without release. She did not go to him. Instead, she listened to how the city responded. No panic, no scramble for succession. The councils adjusted responsibilities. Medical decisions were made openly. When he recovered weeks later, thinner but alive, no one asked him to resume anything beyond what he chose. That told her more than any speech could have. On the 10th anniversary of the archive's release, the city rang its bells, not to commemorate individuals, but to mark the adoption of a new charter. Not a constitution, a revision protocol, an agreement that no document would be considered final, only current. She read it by firelight that night, alone. It was imperfect, contradictory, vulnerable. She smiled. Near midnight, she burned the last list she had kept, the final copy of names taken long ago, now recorded everywhere they needed to be remembered. The fire took them gently. At dawn, she left the continent. Not fleeing, not hiding, just moving forward. Behind her, the city woke into another ordinary day. Arguing, cooperating, failing, adjusting. Alive. Far ahead, lands waited that had not yet learned how dangerous certainty could be. She walked toward them without urgency, without expectation. No longer a weapon, no longer a warning. Just a woman carrying a lesson the world would keep relearning. That freedom was not the absence of order, but the courage to rebuild it together, again and again, without needing to be saved. The road ended at the sea, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a gradual surrender of stone to sand, certainty to horizon. Waves moved with indifferent rhythm, unbothered by borders, councils, or charters. She stood there longer than she intended, coat pulled tight against the salt wind, watching a world that had never needed saving continue exactly as it always had. This was the final test, not for the city, for her. For most of her life, motion had been survival. Stopping meant capture. Attachment meant leverage. Distance meant safety. Even after everything that had changed, her instincts still whispered that staying anywhere too long would turn purpose into prison. She listened to those instincts carefully. Then she questioned them. A ship waited in the harbor behind her, sails half raised, crew unremarkable. They did not know her name. They did not ask. Passage had been paid in advance by someone who understood the value of anonymity. She could board. She could disappear into another story, another system on the brink, another place where shadows still shaped outcomes. She did not move. Instead, she sat on a rock near the waterline and removed the last object she carried from her former life, a small, worn token of rank that no longer existed. She turned it in her fingers, feeling the grooves carved by years of use, of obedience, of rationalized harm. Power always left artifacts behind. She threw it into the sea. It vanished without ceremony. That, she realized, was the point. Days passed. She stayed near the coast, helping without leading, listening without recording. Fishermen argued about nets and tides, not governance. Children learned the rules of games no one enforced. Disputes were settled badly, then better, then badly again. No one asked her to fix anything. The absence felt strange. One evening, as the sun collapsed into copper light, a young woman approached her. Nervous, determined. "You were in the city," the girl said. She did not deny it. "They say you changed everything," the girl continued. She shook her head. "No, I interrupted something." The girl frowned. "Isn't that the same?" "No," she said gently. "Change that depends on one person breaks when they leave." The girl considered this. "Then why did you leave it all?" She looked out at the water, choosing honesty over comfort. "Because if I stayed, they would have stopped trusting themselves." The girl nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but enough. "Will you stay here?" she asked. She smiled. For a while. The answer surprised her. Seasons shifted again. Stories from the city arrived irregularly, carried by traders and travelers. Some councils failed. Others thrived. New conflicts replaced old ones. The charter was revised, then revised again, once disastrously, once brilliantly. The Duke eventually stepped back entirely, becoming what he had always threatened to be, a citizen with opinions and no authority. His name faded from urgency into context. Exactly right. Elsewhere, other cities tried shortcuts. They crowned figures. They copied structures without understanding the fear those structures had been built to survive. Some collapsed. Some endured just long enough to be disappointed. She did not intervene. The world did not need another architect of order. It needed time. Years later, sitting by a different fire on a different shore, she overheard travelers arguing about a place where no ruler held permanent power, where documents were rewritten openly, where leaders rotated and mistakes were not erased. Impossible, one scoffed. Unstable, said another. Still standing, a third replied. She smiled into her cup. That night, she dreamed, not of corridors and lists and commands, but of open squares filled with argument and laughter and frustration that did not curdle into fear. When she woke, the dream did not fade. It followed her into the day, into small acts of patience, into conversations where she resisted the urge to direct and chose instead to ask. This, she understood at last, was the hardest discipline of all. Letting go. In time, her name vanished completely. Not buried, not erased, simply unnecessary. And somewhere far behind her, a city woke each morning not expecting to be saved, but ready to decide, again, how it wished to live. That decision was never final. That was its strength. She walked on, lighter than she had ever been, carrying no titles, no plans, no secret maps. Only a quiet certainty earned the long way. That the most dangerous lie power ever told was that it could not be shared. And the bravest truth people could learn was that no one was coming, because they were already there.